One of the most fascinating persons in the Bible is Job. And at the moment when the history switched for Job, God asked him a specific question. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? And in a very similar way, Jesus once spoke about the time of the kingdom, when he will be elevated and sit on a throne in all his splendor. And he says to his disciples, then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom, prepared for you since the creation of the world. So it does us very good to see these rocky foundations of an old German castle and to look into the very fabric of creation into which one fascinating thing has been built in right from the beginning, the kingdom of God. Jesus didn't answer questions nobody had. He looked for people who had intelligent questions, and when they were seeking, he says, they shall find. And the greatest thing in this world to actually seek and to find is the kingdom of God that needs to be rediscovered. So let us seek for this in some very interesting places. It is the most fascinating and radical idea anyone ever had, which is a people actually ruled by their God, not by some king or president. And that idea of the kingdom of God starts very much in the Garden of Eden, when God chose Adam and Eve and gave them dominion, as it says, over 5 things: the fish, the bird, the earth, domesticated animals and undomesticated animals, not over other people. And Adam and Eve terribly failed at that because they were listening to a snake. So the result was the expulsion out of the Garden of Eden. Next attempt, second attempt, is when God created out of his love a nation for himself, Israel. And as they come out of Egypt, the Exodus, we read this in Exodus 19, that God says, now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Now notice the if you obey, it's a conditional contract, which says quite simply, if you obey my rules and laws, you will be a model nation in this world that everybody can see how it is when people are ruled by their God. Did it work? Not at all. We can find quite quickly, for example, in the book of Judges, where it says, and people behaved as they want, everybody did as he pleased, because Israel had no king. In Samuel, we read the very verse when God was actually offering himself to be king, and Samuel was very sad when they choose a king like everybody else. And God said to him, they have not rejected you, they have rejected me as their king. And this is the second time it really failed for God offering himself to be a king for people. People simply didn't want to be ruled by him. There was a brief time of glory when it looked like Israel had a king who actually followed God under David and Solomon. And these were the glory days to a certain degree, but the result of it faded quickly away and was replaced by division and fractions and factions of the northern kingdom that basically had no good king at all, and the southern kingdom that had a few guys that were good. But the result of the whole story was people replaced God one more time with a human king, and the end result was Babylon. There was no other way for God to click the reset button and say, you guys don't get it. I actually love you and want you to follow my commandments so that you become a model nation. And you have failed, and failed miserably. And then God had a plan. And it was prophesied long ago, for example, in the book of Daniel, in the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, where he dreamt of a rock thrown without a human hand that then grew into a mountain that fills the whole earth. Something that, of course, speaks about Jesus. And it later on says in Daniel 2:44, in the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it itself will endure forever. And then it says about Jesus one more thing prophetically in Isaiah 9 that I want us to see. For a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government, speaks of the kingdom, will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And now listen to this. And of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. That speaks of a time when something small will start to increase and increase and increase without any end until it becomes a mountain that fills the whole earth. And a mountain in biblical symbolic language is speaking of government. So finally Jesus is born, walks around in Israel and collects out of the old something new. 12 that he later on called apostles, and he wanted to build the foundation of his kingdom on top of that. And the kingdom of God is the domain of God's uncontested rule. It's the country in which Jesus is ruling and nobody else. The question is, did it work? If you look at the teaching of Jesus, 100 times he speaks about the kingdom, and about once he speaks about the church. And after all this speaking of the kingdom, when he later on died and resurrected, he meets his disciples in Acts chapter 1, and he detects an amazing lack. What was the lack? They still didn't get the idea that this was a kingdom, a global kingdom, where Jesus is the king, and all those who are invited in and who obey him are citizens of that kingdom. They still thought this is all about glorifying Israel. And I think Jesus' heart must have sank when he heard that, and he called them together for a 40-day retreat, 40 days with the kingdom. And he taught them about the kingdom of God as if this were the only one single subject that counted. And it did. And after that retreat, somebody asked the question, is it now the time that you want to set up the kingdom in Israel? Again, they didn't get it. I don't know what Jesus thought when he left the earth and went to heaven. He thought, will there ever be a time when people understand that the kingdom of God is a country where I am ruling and people are invited, and it is not restricted just to Israel, but for the whole world? The question is, do we understand it today?